Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from today, and welcome to this Audit and Assurance InFocus webinar support for the December 2025 exams. My name is Hazel McLucas and I work as an Education Partner Support Manager at ACCA. Our session today focuses on Make Your Marks, Quick Wins and Study Strategies. You will learn how to achieve marks you can secure quickly with smart exam techniques and focused practice. Roger Gitonga has joined us today to deliver this session, and he is an ACCA member and a tutor with over a decade of diverse finance experience. He's graduated from Oxford Brookes University and holds an MBA. Roger is also the recipient of the ACCA Advocacy Award and is renowned for producing top exam passes in both audit and tax UK papers. You can always access a more detailed profile in the speaker's bio section on your webinar. During this section, Roger will explore effective exam techniques, discover smart strategies, and give advice on time management for the exam. He will recommend what to include and how to focus your studies and practice during these last few weeks leading up to your exam day. And towards the end of the session, he will also cover off some live questions that will be coming in from you in the Q&A box. So before I hand things over, I'd like to briefly run through a few quick housekeeping items. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see there are a number of buttons you can use. Please ensure that both the slides and the media player icons are selected. You'll need both of these during the webinar, so make sure you can see them now. Also, you can use the chat function to engage with fellow participants, and I can see we've already had quite a bit of engagement there already, but please avoid sharing any personal information in the chat. And also, if you look for the icon that resembles a file, clicking this will give you access to helpful materials related to today's webinar, including some direct links. You can rearrange your screen size to suit and resize the windows if you need to. And if at any point you can hear what we're saying or see any of the visuals, then please refresh your browser. By registering for today's webinar, you will get an email tomorrow with the details of how to watch it again. So don't worry if you miss anything or you run into any technical issues, you'll be able to catch up on the recording later. I'm going to hand over to Roger in a moment, and I will be back with you towards the end of the session. And if you'd like to ask ACCA or Roger a question, then please post them in the Q&A section that you should be able to see on your screen. Just a quick note though, we might not be able to respond to everyone individually, whether through the chat or verbally, but we will do our best to share questions and answers that are helpful to everyone on today's webinar. So now I will hand over to Roger.
Right, thank you so much, Hazel. I really appreciate it. So I'd like to first and foremost welcome each and every one of us. I see we're quite a number, and probably I'd love to just get to know where we are joining from, all right? Where we are joining from. So, and I'm so glad to see that we're already having reactions, but kindly just maybe write down on the chat box where you're joining from. That'll be fantastic just to get to know where we are from before we jump into what we'd love to do today, where we're joining from. All right, I see some of us have a few issues, but you can constantly look at your network. All right, I see here we have people from Tunisia, Uzbekistan, India, South Africa, wow, London, the UK, Mauritius, Scotland, Paris, Cardiff, Lesotho, Kenya, Kerala, Uganda, Lesotho. Wow, quite a number of us coming in. Georgia, Hong Kong, Bangladesh. Look at this. And this is one of the most beautiful things for me always when we have so many people from different countries. It makes me really, really respect our qualification. But today, beyond getting to know where you are, because you might be thinking, I'm trying to gather sufficient appropriate audit evidence on your identity, allow us to try and jump into what brought us here. And probably, and I do know that you will enjoy this session. Okay, at least I'll try to enjoy it for you. But let's see, what are we going to be looking at today? So first and foremost, we're going to be diving into exam techniques. Okay, and I really, really want us to understand how can we garner or gain as many marks as possible when it comes to this audit paper. I can guarantee you, you can pass this paper. I've seen one of us ask, what's the pass rate? And even though the pass rate is normally lingers between 44 and 48 or thereabouts, I can tell you we can pass this paper. Secondly, we are also going to be looking at smart strategies. How do we get those easy marks? Because we always have easy marks. And then 3, how to stay in control of your time. I know time management tends to be one of the biggest challenges that a lot of students face globally. So we're going to try and see how we can actually improve on our time management, okay? And then lastly, I have drafted for you a 2-week plan. So you're basically trying to think, especially some of us who might be working or we have other obligations besides preparing for the exam, you might be asking yourself, what do I do for the next 2 weeks? I mean, Roger, you really need to help me. I don't have as much time and I have so much to cover, so what am I going to do in the remaining 2 weeks? And this is something that I'm here to help you in. Hopefully, by the time we get to Q&A, we've answered most of your questions through the presentation. Okay, so let's dive into it. So the first thing I want us to do is we're going to be looking at the exam technique. And one of the most beautiful things I've done for you guys today is actually to take you through the whole syllabus. So I will give you exam technique across the whole syllabus. And I hope that we will thoroughly, understand what we really need to garner. So the first thing that we have here is section 8. Oh my. So I've sat down and I've really pondered over the many years that I've taught audit. One of the things I've really understood and seen about Section A is if you know what you need to know, then honestly speaking, if your knowledge is in check, then you're most definitely going to succeed in this paper. And I'm going to show you exactly why. Let me give you guys an example, okay? Now, I want us to look at this, for instance. I've drafted for you here a previous question or an exam question that was set some years back. And I want us to see here what we can highlight. Notice the question saying, in relation to the audit engagement partner holding the role for 8 years and Hassan's offer of employment with Maldini Company, which of the following safeguards should be implemented in order to comply with ACCA's Code of Ethics and Conduct? Now, there are a few things I want us to understand here. First and foremost, I've used the highlight function. And the reason why I've used the highlight function is because it helps me to identify the key wordings. Because there are times when you can get easily distracted by so much content and you thoroughly want to understand what is the most important thing to actually identify. So here I'm seeing 1, 8 years mentioned. 2, I'm seeing here a son's offer of employment. And then you want me to give the best safeguard for this. Now, from my own knowledge, allow me to show you how I've also used the strike through tool to help me to actually narrow my answer down. So let me look at the ones I've removed first. The first one I've removed is, I've seen here, let me look at the last one. It says here, Buffon and company should resign from the audit. Now, from my own knowledge, first and foremost, audit, I mean, we're in business, guys. We have bills to pay. We have holidays that we want to take. We have ambitions. So if we keep on resigning from an audit just because we don't feel good about it, then we're not going to get paid at all. So I would never usually opt for the answer of resigning unless the threat is one that we cannot reduce to an acceptable level. And even then, that is not as common. So I will strike that, and then I'll come to the next 2. And please note, by the way, if you want to get some level of context, you can actually say, you can actually be able to look at the scenario on your left. And you'll basically see here that you're told the audit engagement partner for Maldini Company has been in place for approximately 8 years, and her son has just been offered a role with this company as a sales manager. So that's what we're basically trying to look at. So one of the things I'm going to try and do here is I would not necessarily go to the next part that says a third party should be consulted. I don't think that's an appropriate safeguard for this. I do think that the threat here is with the partner, because the partner has been there for too long, which broods familiarity. And secondly, I mean, they have their son also who has an opportunity to join the firm. So I do think the best thing that they should do is to remove the person, remove the threat, which is the partner in this case. And you therefore realize your knowledge here could easily ease you into Section A. So very important for us. So I can see some of you are saying you're having a few issues with your audio. Oh my. All right. So we'll try and say, I don't know if I should switch off my video, just in case it doesn't buffer too much. Hazel, you can help me there. All right, because I do think it's fine on my end, and I do think some people having quite fine. But let's see. Let's move on. If we do have a few more issues, I know there's a video that will be uploaded for this.
I've
So
asked the students if they can try refreshing their browser. Let's see if that fixes it. If not, then we can switch your video off.
All right. Fantastic. No problem. All right. I think we can just notify them on the chat box, and then that'll be fine. All right. Okay. Lovely. Now, okay, some of us can hear me well, some of us can't. Well, it's fine. I do know that the recording will be perfect, so that means, you would most definitely get this again, okay? And you can watch me like a movie, so don't worry about that. All right, lovely. Now, let's move on to the next part. So we have here Section B. And one of the few things I want us to dive into Section B is, so I've taught you how to touch Section A of your paper, but let's dive into Section B. And in Section B, I'll be looking at every part of the syllabus. So we're going to start off with audit framework and regulation. And I have a question here that I've actually been able to highlight to you. So the first thing I love to read here is the requirement, where you're told, identify and explain 3 ethical threats which may affect Coronado and Company. Now, if you would want to find out where I got this question from, you can actually get it from the AA March to June 2025 paper, which is found on your practice platform, all right? So that's what I'll be using for reference purposes so that you can understand it better. All right. So you're told to identify and explain, and there are 2 things you want to consider here. But secondly, we're also told to recommend an appropriate safeguard. Okay. Now, as you can see as well within the scenario, I have been able to highlight critical things. So you're told here during a meeting, Pimento Company's finance director has mentioned to the audit engagement partner that he's keen to align the objectives of Pimento Company with its auditors, Coronado and Company. So allow me to read this for you, okay? Assuming that you're all listening or you're reading with me. Now, to assist in achieving this, he has suggested that the audit fee could be based on a percentage of Pimento Company's final profit for the year. Now, we normally describe this as a contingent profit. I mean, we'd never want to actually agree to such, okay? Now, as we go by, you're told here, Pimento Company's finance director has also requested that they provide some accounting and bookkeeping services, and the services proposed will be of a routine nature. Now, I'd like to dive, and as you continue, you will read a few more other things from this scenario. But let me highlight something just to give you a bit of, taste, or at least desire for you to consistently go and do this question. I'm going to pick up a threat that is actually not here within this cut and pasted area, but was actually within the scenario. And I'd like us to be able to understand why I've done this, and also to take you guys through, how we should answer this part of the area. So you're seeing here, you're told here, one of the answers that unfortunately students could give that is wrong is this. So This is on the identification part because the question asked you to identify, to explain, and to give an appropriate safeguard. So with the identification part, we have here, the audit manager is considering including the daughter of Pimento Company's finance director in the audit team. Now, I'd also like us to compare between the wrong and the right answer so that you can also ask yourself, where would you improve on if it was you? So notice here, this wrong answer and the right answer almost look similar. And the only difference is that I've added in the right answer the type of threat that we can see here. So one of the things we usually recommend, or actually insist the student does, that if you find a question like this in your exam, okay, one of the things I'd like you guys to do, okay, thoroughly, and this is important, is you want to specifically focus on the type of threat. So not only identifying the threat from the scenario, but also specifying the type of threat. And I can say I'm being told to switch off my video, so let me do that, okay? So one of the things I would like you to be able to do here is to ensure that when you identify the type of threat, I mean, the threat from the scenario, then also focus on the type of threat. Now, if you only specify the type of threat without identifying the actual problem within the scenario, then you'll still not get the full half a mark. So for identifying correctly, you get half a mark. And I hope you guys can see this. All right. So I found a lot of my students, they're so confident, they're very confident they selected the right problem in the scenario. And I do agree they did. But then they didn't score the half a mark simply because they did not state the type of threat. So always state the type of threat. Then the next thing is the implication. So the implication arises mostly from you explaining the reason, or rather from you explaining why is this actually a problem. So a lot of students gave this answer, which is very devastating for me. They would say, this will impact the auditor's independence. And I'd ask them how. Now, let me explain, why do so many students struggle to explain? Well, I do think it's childhood trauma. Well, not for everyone, really. But I remember growing up, there are times I would like to ask certain questions out of my inquisitive nature. And I'd ask here, why are the clouds white? And why do they get dark when it wants to rain? Things like that. Or why is the sky blue? Now, from where I come from in Africa, my friend, there are some questions you can't ask. Your mother could be in the bedroom and you could be in the kitchen, but somehow her slipper will land on your head. So you basically realize that you don't want to necessarily, I don't know how it happens, but you find yourself not asking as many questions now, or even taking the time to explain or to think thoroughly, or to actually apply something known as metacognition, which I shall talk about. So notice the difference between the wrong and the right answer. In the right answer, I focus so much on, primarily trying to understand here, how can I show why this is a problem? Now look at my answer here. The audit assistant's judgment could be influenced such that decisions are made in the financial interests of her father, or she may be too accepting of her father's work. So what are you doing here? You're telling me what's wrong with that? Someone could ask you, and allow me to say this, maybe some of you are going through a heartbreak, so forgive me for this. But imagine if I tell you, don't ever date your ex again. You'd ask me why. And then I tell you, because it is wrong. I mean, how have I helped you? How have I helped you? But if I tell you that this could introduce the same toxicity that you had initially entertained that will cause you pain again, and that is why I'm advising you not to, then you'd understand better. You see, I've explained the implication. But if you tell me just because it is wrong, my friend, you'll keep on getting hurt, isn't it? And then we come here, the safeguard. And with the safeguard, you're told here we have to give the difference between the wrong and the right answer. So here, one of the biggest concerns for me with students is that when they're given an appropriate safeguard, they do not show the action. They show the objective. So I'll give you an example. Based on the same scenario we've picked, a client's family member should not be included in the audit team of the client. Now, my friend, where is the solution there? They usually tell you, if you want to be rich, you have to learn how to give solutions, not create more problems, right? I don't know if you guys have that person in your friend group or circle who always points out the problem but never gives you a solution. They'll tell you, hey man, you shouldn't eat that. Okay, then what should I eat? I don't know, but don't eat that. You shouldn't go there. Okay, then where should we go? I don't know, but let's not go there. You see, no solutions. So when it comes to safeguards, give actions. Show us what we should do. So if someone just says, yeah, client's family members should not be included in the audit team of the client, okay, what should they do? An alternative member of the staff should instead be assigned to the audit. Now, that's a safeguard. You gave the action, not the objective. Yeah? That's what I'd love us to do. Now, let's come to risk. I know some of us have questions on risk, so I'm sure you're really looking forward to this. So let's come here. In your risk question, this is very common. Many a times they're going to ask you about identifying, okay? Identify a risk. And from there, give an appropriate safeguard. So not safeguard, sorry, an appropriate auditor's response to that risk. So I'm going to focus on how to write answers here. So for identification, one of the tips I have for you guys is you can copy paste the audit risk identified as opposed to typing it out. Why do I prefer this sometimes? Because of time. Okay, because of time. I don't know if you guys have ever gone to the exam, especially if you're going to a center, and then you find there are like 5 people around you who can type extremely fast, right? It's like they type 10 letters per second, and then there's you looking for Q, A, T, R, So the times you can copy paste it. But then the thing is, when you're copy pasting, there's an issue that a lot of students make here. They sometimes copy paste the result of a risk as opposed to what also gave rise to that risk. And I'll give you an example, okay? I'll give you an example so that you understand what I'm saying, so that I don't sound like I'm talking gibberish. So let's move on and I'll explain this better. Okay, we'll do a question on it. I told you, today we are trying to cover everything in 45 minutes. Man, Lord help me. Now, let's move on to this next part here with explanation. My friends, this is the one area that I find to be very devastating when marking scripts, because you find a student has identified very well. By the way, they've done a fantastic job. They've stated here that Roger Company is a new client of, I don't know, X company or X audit firm. And I'm just like, wow, these guys have done well. Okay, they've identified it so well. I'm so proud of this student. Then they come to the explanation and they disappoint you. This is like you telling me, I'm going to take you out for a date on Saturday, only for you to cancel 1 minute to time. Don't do this to the marker. So you find here, with the explanation bit, there are 3 things I need us to be very keen on, okay? 1, you can either, when you're explaining the risk, you can either mention the type of the audit risk component affected. Now, you might ask yourself, what is the component? The component is things like inherent risk, detection risk, control risk. So with my example for the new client, I could say here that there's a risk of, there's a detection risk that could occur since you're not familiar with the client's balances and things like that. So you're able to explain to me. You're not just saying there's a detection risk. You're telling me there's a detection risk since. So you go on to explain, why do you think there's a detection risk? Or in my example of a new client, you could say you're not familiar with the balances, all right? Hence, they could be misstated. Fine. The opening balances could be misstated since you did not audit this client in the previous year. So you see, you're explaining why you think that. And that's the second part I want us to look at. State the specific area. My friends, the specific. There's a point I've seen with students where you find a company, you're told here that a company has purchased fixtures and fittings, or a warehouse. Let's say they've purchased a warehouse, all right? And they've purchased a warehouse near the end of the accounting year. Or let's say they've purchased a website. Let's just use the website. They've purchased a website for $1 million, okay? Now, one of the things I've seen here that is a big issue for students is that many a times you will find that they will unfortunately not specify the area. So rather than them saying that this is PPE or in term, let me use fixtures and fittings. Rather than them saying PPE could be understated or overstated, or PPE, there could be a PPE valuation, because that's where the assertion is. It could be a PPE accuracy issue. For them, they would normally state non-current assets. Now, when you state or assets, when you state assets or non-current assets, that's a very generalized term. Okay, because you realize that if you're going to specifically state assets, assets is wide. Assets could be goodwill, assets could be intangible assets, assets could be, it's wide. Assets could be receivables, assets could be cash. So specify which part of the assets do you think has been impacted and in what way. Is it cutoff? Is it accuracy? Is it completeness? Is it, presentation? What exactly is the problem? And then from there, state the specific, again, area, but refer to over or under, or, this is a place I'll need to warn you on, misstated. So there are times I could deal with, maybe I've gotten an example of a question where, I don't know, they've been having issues of their receivables collection period increasing. And then I state there that receivables could be overvalued, all right, or overstated, let me say, and irrecoverable debts understated. Now, if I can clearly see that receivables could be overstated, you notice I've specified receivables, not assets, not current assets, receivables. And also noted, I've noted, please note, I've stated that it is overstated. But one of the challenges I have is if I can clearly see receivables is overstated, and then you go on to say receivables are misstated, my friend, will not give you a mark because you can clearly see what the problem is, all right? Then the third one is the response. Wow. Now, a lot of students struggle with the response for a few reasons. One, I don't know if you guys have noticed, sometimes the response looks very similar to a substantive procedure. And the only difference is that they're actually both procedures, by the way. They're all describing what the auditor should do, okay, and not the management. But the challenge I have here is a lot of times either we find many students not given sufficient detail of how they can actually find out more about the risk or find out more about whether the risk is there or not, okay? And instead, they give a very scarce answer. So I'll give you an example, okay? In my question on receivables, and we're going to do a question on this, we're going to look at a question on this, but on my question on receivables, and I say that receivables have been overvalued, okay, since, they might not have captured effectively well the recoverable debts, or, there might be a risk of not being able to recover the receivables, or things like that, okay, something similar. Now, I want us to think about the response here. A student says, the auditor, actually, first of all, one student will give an explanation of what the management should do. The management should strengthen their credit control department. And I just find when I see such an answer, I get this one tear. I don't know if you've seen any Denzel Washington movie that, sometimes he cries with one tear, okay? It's painful when, you'd rather cry many tears, but with one tear, that's the most painful one. One tear just strolls down your cheek. That's what I feel sometimes. Because the thing is that you've given what the management should do, increase the control department. That's not the auditor's job. But then at the same time, there's a student who will also say, probably they understand that is the auditor who should do something. But then the answer is the auditor should do detailed procedures. And I'm just like, which ones? Which ones? So what would they do to confirm if those receivables are recoverable or not? And if they are recoverable, then at least we know that the receivables are not overstated. But if they are irrecoverable, then we know that, the receivables are overstated since they might not have captured that. So the question is, which receivable? How would we know the receivables are overstated or not? That's the question. How would we know? So you need to describe the process. This is why it's called a procedure, because if you ask any doctor who does many procedures, they answer the question how. Okay? Now, let's look at an example here in this question. Now, in this question here, and I want to move a bit fast if you'd allow me, I want us to look at this audit risk question. I've picked up here a few things. I've highlighted, you're asked to get 8 audit risks and an appropriate response. Okay, again, I get this question from the March to June 2025. Notice here how we say, the audit manager has obtained permission from the finance director, and I've borrowed this from the scenario. Okay, so I've highlighted my point there in yellow. I have copy pasted it as I guided you guys on. You can do that. So the copy pasted part here is that the audit manager has obtained permission from the finance director for the external audit team to rely on the controls testing undertaken by the internal audit department. Okay. Now, if you go a paragraph before, not a paragraph, but a sentence before that, in this question some time back, one of the things we saw students doing is one of the things they'll pick up is, if you look at the sentence before, it says their internal audit aims to visit every store over a 24-month period. And a lot of students pointed that to be an issue. And we consider this to be okay. You know, it could be business practice. Of course, you could think of many other things that could occur within those 24 months that are wrong and things like that. But at least they've had a well-calendarized or one well-drawn-out schedule to ensure that they visit every store. Even if it's within a 24-month period, at least they've been able to ensure that within those 2 years, they've been able to capture at least the most significant stores. So there's nothing there. But then if you now come back to what I've identified, look at what I've said here. There could be an increased detection risk. Why? So a lot of students stopped here. There could be an increased detection risk, and they are done, and they moved on to the response. But I'm just like, my friend, you've not explained to us. You stated the type or the component of risk affected. You stated, you didn't explain. Notice in the requirement, it says describe. So when you're describing, if I tell you describe Roger, and you tell me he's a man, my friend, I could clap for you, but I mean, that's vague. How many men are we in the world? So, but if you go on to tell me, you know, he wears glasses, tall, dark, and handsome according to himself, whatever it may be, but you basically realize you can give a very appropriate explanation of how I look like for you to be able to identify that this is Roger. So it's the same thing with this. If I'm going to just state there's an increased detection risk, I need to go on to explain why I think that. Since the testing done by internal audit could be poorly performed, and hence a reliance on their work could lead to an inappropriate opinion. Okay, so I've explained why I think it's a detection risk. So I've stated the type, but I've also explained why I think that's a problem. Then I move to the response. The external audit team should obtain some of the reports done by the internal audit concerning the store visits and confirm if the work done is up to par with their standards. Now, this is a very long point, but the focus here is what will the auditor do to not just mitigate the risk really, but in this case, because detection risk falls on them, they might want to think about how they can reduce the detection risk. Okay, because that falls on them as the auditor. So how can they reduce the detection risk? But if it's any other kind of risk, they need to think about how to gain more evidence pertaining whether that risk is actually there or not. Okay. Then we come to the controls. Now I've jumped to controls. What a shift. Now, the thing is, I've actually done a video on controls on the ACCA YouTube channel, the ACCA Student Resources channel. It's also linked on Study Hub. You can go watch it. I think it's a fantastic video. That's just me talking, but I think it is. Now, I want us to look at this question. Identify and explain aid deficiencies, very common problem for a lot of students. One of the reasons why I think students fail in controls is because they're not familiar with the cycles we normally test. So for instance, the revenue cycle, the payroll cycle, you know, such things, the sales, the purchases cycle and the likes, and the inventory cycle. And if you want to get more information on this, I think you can check chapter 12 on the Study Hub. We have a bit of descriptions on the cycles we would normally test, okay? And those are the cycles we'll always test in the exam. We cannot test outside that, by the way. So if you want to get to understand the cycles that could be tested in internal controls, chapter 12 is your focus point, okay? Now, I would like us to see here, and allow me to just say this, because I know this could be a question. Let me just take you guys back. For the auditor's response, 1 point was enough. I didn't have to give both, okay? 1 point would be enough, okay? The answer I gave there was appropriate. Now, you'll find here with the control deficiency here, I've picked up an issue, okay, in the control deficiency. And I've said here, and I've picked this up from the part I've highlighted. So you can look at the place highlighted and you'll see where I got my deficiency from. So it says here, the daily sales report for all stores are reconciled to the cash and credit card takings reports from the cash register every Friday by a senior finance clerk. Sometimes the power of identifying a deficiency, this is what I do. The times I think students struggle to identify deficiencies simply because they do not know what a deficiency is. And a deficiency is simply two things. Either, one, there's a control missing that should be there, or two, there's a control present, but it is not effective in its running. So for instance, you could have a CCTV camera that is there, but it is not working. That's a deficiency. Or you could have no CCTV camera at all, and still that is a problem. So there are times when you identify a deficiency from the scenario, try to think what could be the problem based on the explanation I've given you. So if I look at this, is there a control? I see here, this person is reconciling. Okay, so reconciliation is being done. So there's no problem. At least there's a control there. But what's the problem? They do it every Friday. And I think if it's a daily sales report being reconciled every week, that's a problem. So you see how I work around it. I've identified that there is a control here, which is reconciliation, and therefore the issue is not that they are reconciling. The issue is the frequency of the reconciliation. And therefore, I focus so much on how this control is operating. So that's what I look at. So I say weekly reconciliation is too long, okay, to identify a cash theft that might have occurred and is too infrequent. If not careful, the company could face a reduction in cash flow or cash recorded due to theft or cash not identified on a timely basis. Now, you're trying to ask Roger, okay, this answer is long, Roger. What are you thinking in your head? Like, what are you looking for really from us whenever we are giving an explanation to a deficiency? You know what? That question is fantastic. And I'm going to answer it in the next slide. But also, I'd like us to see here, when we come to the recommendation, one of the things I focus on is what they should do, not the objective. So a recommendation should be an action, what they should do, not what should they achieve. No, what should they do? A lot of students write what they should achieve, okay? And what I mean by that is that they write the objective that they want to satisfy as opposed to how you can satisfy that objective. So someone would say reconciliation should be done daily. That's a good point. But by who? Who should do the reconciliation? So if I say here, the daily sales report should be reconciled daily, I've stated the frequency, which is fantastic. I've stated by whom? The finance department. And that is a fantastic point, okay? So let me give you guys now my thinking around this so that you understand. When you're identifying deficiencies, you can also copy paste from the scenario, okay? But be very careful to copy paste the facts from the scenario, okay? Because sometimes you could copy paste something and fail to spot the deficiency. So like now in that question, one of the things we saw students highlighting was customers paying cash. Now, my friends, many of the businesses do both credit and cash, isn't it, in their transactions? So there's no problem paying in cash. The problem is the operation around cash. How do they handle the cash? So you see, this is not enough information for us to consider it to be a deficiency because we don't know how they operate the cash or how they handle the cash. Once we find out how they handle the cash, then we'll pick that to be the problem, okay? Then we move on to the explanation. Now, a lot of students would say this. I'm just showing you guys the mistakes we make and how we can improve, okay? When a student says here, this will result in fraud and error, I mean, all deficiencies will result in fraud and error. That's why they are there, to cause that problem, okay? But a clear understanding of how the deficiency will result in fraud and error, how, is needed. So think of what negative thing could go wrong in the company if this thing is not addressed. Okay, so if, for instance, cash, let's say the cash is, if it was in a let's say a supermarket, cash is stored, overnight in the supermarket, what could go wrong? Now, if you say there are, fraud and error could occur, my friend, you have done well, but you're not there. But if you go on to tell us that theft of cash could occur, and this could affect the cash flow of the business, if that money is kept there, or could lead to misappropriation of cash, leading to misstated balances in the cash book, and that shows us how it has affected the business. Okay? And then the recommendation. I remember I told you, action, not objective. Practical as well. Okay? Practical as well. Now, we live in a very interesting world right now where technology is taking up quite a bit. All right? But sometimes you still want to understand where the world is at, even as we assess where technology can take us. Okay, so I do think if you've watched the old classic cartoon known as Jetsons, you will notice that Jetsons was they saw into the future. They saw that we'll have flying cars and the likes. Now imagine giving someone a recommendation, if you're stuck in traffic, call your flying car and let it pick you up from where you're stuck and leave. It sounds good, but where are you getting a flying car from? So let's be a bit practical. So in your recommendation, state who should do what, how, and when. Okay? Now, with audit evidence, let me take you guys through this very quickly. Familiarize yourself with the requirement always. Why? What part of the financial statement area is the question requiring you to test on? Allow me to read this. Has the requirement specified a particular assertion you need to test? So I'm taking you guys through my train of thought. Okay, look for the requirement. Are they telling you to look for receivables, inventory? Do they want you to test on that? I saw a lot of students fail in a certain exam where the question specified, look at disposal of non-current assets. Many students gave tests on non-current assets. They didn't focus on the fact that the question asked specifically for disposal on non-current assets and not just non-current assets. Okay, and then also try and see, has an assertion been stated? Have they said, look at valuation for inventory only? So try and look around that. Then step 2, read the scenario. And why you do this is because there are times in the scenario you could pick up key things that could really help you draft your answer so that you don't find yourself creating rote-land answers. Now, I know many of you practice many questions, and that's fantastic. But there could be a temptation of drafting questions or drafting your answers simply based on how you've written your answers in previous attempts of your practice questions. So I'll give you an example. I find a lot of times the examiner could sneak this in the scenario and say that the receivable circularization process has failed. Like they never get confirmation. And therefore what the examiner is trying to tell you there is, my friends, don't write that as an answer. But then you'll find another student there jolly writing down, perform receivable circularization. And though it sounds like a good answer, the scenario gave us information that you shouldn't do this. Then step 3, if the question did not require you to specifically test an assertion, then you can think of various relevant assertions. I like this. So if I'm given, let's say, a question on receivables, I can think of one, and it's 5 marks. I can give a point on valuation. I can give a point on completeness. I can give a point on accuracy. I can give a point on presentation, and I can give 1 point on analytical procedures. 5 marks in the bag, and I move on. Now, I want us to look at this. When giving your substantive procedure, you can use this as a technique. This is just a prescribed technique that I give my students. Think of the verb, the document or personnel, and then the reason. And you always want to ensure your procedure flows. Remember, procedure is like a step-by-step process that you're given. So the times, even when you write down whatever procedure you've written, try and visualize what you've written. Does it really make sense? Will it really help you to achieve the goal, in terms of satisfying the assertion that you're meant to test? So I give guys a chance to look at these 2 points here and allow us to do this together. The tool here, recalculate the redundancy provision to confirm completeness and agree components of the calculation to supporting documentation, such as employee contracts. Now look at that again. Recalculate the redundancy provision to confirm completeness. Okay. and agree components of calculation to supporting documentation, such as employee contracts. Now, this person's point looks like it makes sense, but there's no flow. Now look at the second student and how they wrote it. Almost the same point, but there's a flow. They tell us here, step by step, obtain a sample of employee contracts. So that's why I should start, yeah? I get a sample of employee contracts. Then what do I do with that? Derive the components of the redundancy provision calculation. So that's why I'm getting those contracts, to get the components. Then what do I do next? Recalculate the redundancy provision. Now I have the components, I have information that can help me to calculate. And then from there, what do I do with that amount? Since I've recalculated, take that amount and agree it to the amount recorded in the trial balance. So that's what you need to do. Why am I doing that? Because you want to ensure whether the amount recorded is accurate. Look at that. What a flow. Beautiful. Well structured. Now, very quickly, your SMART strategies, okay? For section A, knowledge is your friend, and we've already said that. I personally have a bias that in your section A, you should always try and hit, 20 out of 30 or more. It's a fantastic place to be. I had a student who scored 26 out of 30. All they had to score in section B was 24 to pass at least, okay? Which I think is very comfortable, because already, remember, the first question in section B is 30 marks. Then always read the requirement. I always tell people a requirement is so key. If you don't know what someone requires from you, you could give them the wrong answer. Okay, if I tell you that I love watches and then you go on to buy me a gift and the gift is shoes or flowers, I could appreciate your thought that you thought about me. But my friend, I may not appreciate your gift because you didn't pick what I required for. Copy paste with wisdom. And I've showed you here sometimes how you could copy paste something from the scenario, but it doesn't necessarily have the deficiency or the risk we're looking for. Please also note, many audit risk questions, by the way, are very repetitive. Okay, they are very repetitive. So if you do as many questions as possible, you might pick up a trend. Highlight key points in identifying risks, and I've showed you guys how to highlight or how to use the highlight button, and also use the strike through feature to help you, especially in section A. I normally use this as a technique where I know if I can eliminate about 2 questions already out of the possible 4 options I'm given, then I have a very high chance of passing. Now, practice metacognition. I mentioned this before. So I'm going to explain to you guys what metacognition is. Metacognition is simply thinking about your thoughts. What are you saying, Roger? Let me show you. Let me explain to you. There's a plan here. Look at this study plan very quickly. Okay, I'll just pick up day 1. Okay, but you'll have the notes, so I'll just show you guys what you can look for. Look at this day 1 person. Their focus area is audit framework and regulation. Okay. Now, when you're looking at their planning before study, their goal is to review the purpose of audit, regulatory environment, and the ASAPs. During their study, they ask, can I explain why audits are needed and how regulation ensures quality? You see, this person is thinking through their thoughts. So they're not just reading, they're not just cramming. They're asking themselves questions that would actually question also how well do they understand whatever they've been able to do or learn. And then even after studying, they'll ask themselves, did I just memorize standards or can I apply them to a scenario? And then the note gaps. So you see, that's a metacognitive study plan. So you're not just studying, you're not just doing questions. You're also trying to highlight, wait, why did I fail this question? Okay, now, this question I failed, what answer was given? Okay, why did they give that kind of answer? That makes sense. Okay, why was my answer wrong then? What was my train of thought? My thought process might have been wrong here. You see, so you're basically dealing with metacognition. I learned this way. I was a topper in 6 papers during my time. So I'm telling you, this is how I studied. Okay, this is how I studied, by the way. Yeah, and sometimes it was last minute. I won't lie to you. I'm like some of you guys here. As much as I tell you, study early. My friends, I did do a bit of last minute, which was very dangerous. Yeah. Now, tips on time management, how to deal with them, map the paper, know your exam format, and this will really help by doing the mock. We have a mock on the practice platform, by doing the questions on the practice platform. Get to know the format, familiarize yourself through the specimen exams, through the practice tests. This would really help. Create a mark time rule. I tell students for every 1 mark, 1.8 minutes. This is fantastic. Sometimes you can even break down. So if you're doing a 30-mark question, instead of doing a full exam paper, take one 30-mark question, try and see whether you can finish it in 54 minutes. If you can't, then that means you need to work on your time also. Try to also go through the paper very quickly. Read all questions once, tick the questions you know, flag the ones that are hard. This can really help you to now say, okay, here I can finish very quickly. This I might take a bit more time on, so I might want to give a bit more, time for this. This one I don't have to waste so much time on. Also, copy, paste, highlight, and strike through, which I've shared with you. And I do think that you can finish Section A very quickly. Okay? Now, my study plan very quickly as I end. I would like to share with you guys this. This is me basically saying, and I really hope, I want to pause here because I'm not able to take you guys through my very detailed, it's a detailed study plan. So what I'd like you guys to do here is when you get the documents, okay, you can take a picture now, okay? You can actually just take a picture, take a screenshot of this. But look at how I've broken down what you can be able to actually do week 1. All right, what you should do, what you could consider. And I do think this is from next week, by the way. You can actually use this from next week. And then even have another study plan for even week 2. Okay, so what I'd like you to do is when you get the documents, which I know will be sent to your email, and even when this video is uploaded on YouTube, you can actually be able to pick this up. Okay, yes. Now, allow me to read very quickly the questions that I have here, because I want to answer as many questions as possible. One of you has asked me how to answer audit risk and internal controls questions. I think I've taken you guys through that. I've also given you a tip on substantial procedures, so I can skip on that as well, okay? I also find here one of the other things that have been answered is from where do we have to do substantive questions for the exam and how to approach it? Okay, now audit evidence as a whole can be tested both in section A and B, but allow me to give an assessment. Audit evidence could sometimes be tested in section B around about, let me give an approximate 18 to 25 marks from it. Okay, and therefore you find that it will most definitely showcase itself. The most tested areas in section B are audit risk, internal controls, and audit evidence. Okay, so you'll get an audit risk question, and I told you based on practice you can be able to touch quite a bit on that. Now, what are the best resources for us to look into and to get into the mindset of an auditor? That's fantastic. I think what I'd like to take you through is, or to maybe redirect you, is to focus more on the mindset of the marker. And you know what? We actually have that as a resource on ACCA, all right? Under the ACCA student tab, if you go to the resources, there you'll normally see there that we have Read the Mind of the Marker. Fantastic tool. I would recommend everyone to use that. Read the Mind of the Marker, together with the examiner's report. Is it necessary to mention or quote ISA standards? No, don't even have, you don't have to. You just need to know what they say. You don't need to state them, okay? You don't get extra marks for them, okay? I've answered how you can best prepare for section A. I've also stated what could be tested in section B. I see some of you are asking this. In the audit risk question, to get full marks for the risk, is it essential to include the words inherent control or detection risk? Or is there a clear explanation of the risk enough without those terms used? So it's one of the ways you can use to explain the risk identified. So if, for instance, I find that these guys are transferring their data from one system to another, I could mention that there could be an increased control risk, or I could also give a different kind of explanation, but still tied to the financial statements. So for instance, there's a risk that the balances, the opening balances in a new system could be misstated if the transfer has not been done appropriately. So you see, I don't have to necessarily mention the component. There are also two other ways of doing this, which I highlighted as well earlier, okay? I think you struggle with substantive procedures. I've given you, a step-by-step basis on how you can do that. Remember, document, or rather the verb, the document, the reason. But please note, sometimes it could be the verb. Most times, actually, it could be the verb, document, verb again, document, verb again, then the reason. So sometimes you could be, obtain this, agree with this, do this to this because you want to confirm that. Okay. The focus is ensure it flows, because it's a step-by-step process of how you can confirm, if let's say this receivables is valuation has been done appropriately, whether the sales are complete, such a thing. You're given step by step. I failed my AA exam and I'm really sorry. I think for me, anyone who has failed, the first thing you need to do, and I've failed a paper before, so allow me to speak from experience. The first thing I had to do was to work on my mindset. Honestly, it was really hard, because sometimes you could recap your failure and then think that because the reason why you failed is because you've labeled yourself a failure. So sometimes I had to work on my mindset and say, Roger, this failure was good for you. This failure has taught you things that you can work on, improve on, etc. And therefore, one of the things you can now do is understand where you fail. And the fantastic thing with the SCCA right now is that they have a report, that your my exam performance report shows you what you can work on. Now, you said you wanted to, one of the issues you had here was with risks. Now, with risks, this is my focus on you. If you're asked for 6 or 8 audit risks, most times in the question, there'll be up to 10 audit risks. Don't write all the 10. Pick your best 8 and move on, okay? Pick your best 8 or move on, because sometimes you waste so much time writing all of them, and you're trying to look for all of them, and yet you just need 8. So pick the best 8. We won't give you more marks for writing more. Now, I think I've answered some of the questions here. I want to be sure that as you've copied the risk from, yes, if you copy paste the right risk, okay? So one of you asked here, I want to be sure as you've copied the risk from the scenario, will you get the 0.5 mark? I will. 100%, because I copied the risk. I copied the right risk within the scenario. You don't have to write it in your own words, okay? Where cash theft has occurred, should the amount recorded in revenue be aligned with the daily sales report or the actual cash banked? Okay, where cash theft has occurred, should the amount recorded in revenue be aligned with the daily sales report or the actual cash bank? Okay, this was from the risk question. So your focus is not to be the accountant. Your focus is to really try and understand, can you confirm if the balance is correct or not? So you don't have to go into detail in trying to say, as the accountant, this should be aligned with that and this. No. That's not your focus. Your focus is more focused on how can I confirm that this has been done, that this reconciliation has been done, should be done every week, So your focus is not on whether it should be aligned. Don't be the accountant, be the auditor, okay? I'm about to finish. I have 2 more questions, then I end. If you are to write a memorizer 1-page clip sheet to help guide you through the whole exam, what would you write to memorize on this? Oh my goodness. 1 page. Let's do this. Reach out to me on LinkedIn. I can see how to help you there, okay? All right. What approach would you recommend for deciding which section of the exam to attempt first? I personally start with section A, and the reason is because with section A, if I don't know an answer, I just flag and move on. You don't have to waste so much time trying to beat yourself, flag, move on. Okay, that way you'll finish section A very quickly. Some questions you might actually get, and that will give you more time to tackle the ones that you're more sure of in section B. So in section A, it's easy for you to flag and move on, which I think is a fantastic thing to do. All right, so I do think that I'd want to stop there. I really hope that you guys enjoyed this. I know we've really tried to cover as much as we can, but thank you for being such a great crowd, and I wish you guys the very best. You don't have to panic. If you can manage your panic, one way of managing your panic is ensuring if the world was to come to an end on the day of your exam, then you realize your panic was useless, isn't it? All right, all the best.
Thank you so much, Roger. And finally, just to recap, I want to just mention the 3 best resources that you can use to equip yourself for the exam. So firstly, we do have the ACCA Practice Platform, which Roger's mentioned, and it has specimen and past exam content where you can self-mark your answers. And you can also use marking guides and sample answers in there. But it allows you to track your performance, which will give you confidence that you're exam ready. And you can also find the pre-December mock exams in there as well. Also, we have the ACCA Study Resources YouTube channel, and on here you can find latest videos to help you prepare for your exam. For example, you can find videos on how to perfect exam technique and exam-specific guidance to help build your confidence. And finally, the ACCA Study Hub, which is an online study content and it covers the full syllabus. So you'll find short quizzes to test your understanding as you progress through, and there's practice and revision questions and flashcards that are a great help for preparation for your exam. Now that brings us to the end of today's live session, and I really hope you found it helpful and picked up some useful tips. Before we wrap up completely, a quick reminder to check out the resources in the resource section on your screen. They're extremely helpful as you prepare for your exam. I know some of you had some technical issues, but as we mentioned at the start and in the chat, don't worry if you missed anything. You'll receive an email tomorrow with a link to the recording and you can watch all of this again. Thank you, Roger, for providing your valuable insights today, and also thank you very much to the team who've supported us in the back end to deliver this session. And finally, thank you to all of you for joining today, and we do wish you the best of luck for your exam.